Not one, not two. It's the show where you're told you're not you. It's nothing in the middle, nothing in the middle, nothing in the middle, nothing in the middle of nothing.
Hi, I'm Joey Lott, and welcome to the 11th episode of Nothing in the Middle. And as usual, I have the questions over on my right, and I'm also framed by tiny sweaters. So let's go ahead and get started. And today, the first question is really more of a polite injunction. It says, please talk about addiction. So I should preface this by saying that, as usual, I can only really talk about my own experience. I'm certainly not an authority. So with that said, my own experience of addiction is more of what I would consider to be kind of classified as a psychological addiction, not a physiological addiction, and I think there may be an important distinction to make there. So I'll be speaking about the psychological addiction aspect, and it's my experience that that addiction has a strong component of compulsion to it, which usually, I think if we take a look, at least it's been my experience, that there's a desire, a very strong desire, to try to avoid something that would be perceived as being bad, very unpleasant, scary, difficult. And so the so-called addiction is a conditioned way, a strategy of trying to avoid what would be even worse. So I think that the challenge that many of us have in trying to deal with addictions, because if we consider something an addiction, usually there's a negative connotation. We think that there's something bad about it, and we don't. I mean, people jokingly talk about an addiction to music, for example, but they don't really think that that's bad. But people talk about addictions to cigarettes, or addictions to people talk about addictions to coffee, but only, I guess, if they think that that's bad, right? I mean, so we talk about addictions to things that where we have this idea that it's bad somehow, and so there's this, on the one hand there's a conflict, because on the one hand we want to stop the addictive behavior, but on the other hand, if we gave up the addictive behavior, so-called, then we'd be faced with something that would be worse. So if you don't smoke the cigarette, then what? And I think that's important to take a look at, because otherwise then we just stay in judgment of ourselves, like, I should not be doing this thing, this addictive behavior, so-called, because it's bad. But that, I think, lacks compassion for ourselves. I mean, I think certainly we deserve compassion, and if we're not going to give it to ourselves, then we're just going to be waiting around for somebody else to do it. And when they do it, we won't really be able to receive it. So it's good to practice compassion with yourself, I think, and just to take a look. What is it that would happen if I didn't do this so-called addictive behavior? Just imagine what that would be like. So there you are in that situation, and maybe it's a stressful situation, and you want the cigarette. But, oh no, there's no cigarette. You're all out. And you run to the corner store, but they're all out. No cigarettes. So what would that be like? And sometimes we think, oh, well, that would be wonderful. But underneath that, if you really take a look, there's something worse. Something worse than the so-called addictive behavior. Because we're not stupid. We're not bad. We're not bad people. We're just trying to feel okay, right? I mean, that's what we're doing. We're trying to feel okay. We just want to be okay. Good would be nice. Ecstatic would be even better, but we'll settle for okay, right? Most of the time. And I think that that's the thing to have compassion for. I think it's okay to want to feel okay. If you feel bad, then it's not virtuous to feel bad. That's not somehow, doesn't make you a better person to feel bad. And so and anyway, you don't have a choice in the matter because your body doesn't want to feel bad. It's going to rebel against that. And you have this conditioned learning that doing this addictive behavior is going to help you somehow. Even if the addictive behavior is unpleasant, it will be better to do that than the alternative of not doing the addictive behavior and being faced with what you'd be faced with then. So I think that's important, to have compassion and to see that that conditioning was most likely put into place at earlier time in your life, usually, in childhood. And if you look at a child who would, I mean, maybe some people would, but most of us would look at a child and see the innocence, the goodness. Don't really want to, hurt children. So it's easier to have compassion for children, and since this conditioning was put into place most likely as a child, I think it's good to have compassion, like the same compassion you'd have for a child, and just to see, okay, so I'm trying to avoid something scary, I'm trying to avoid something painful. Then it's possible to let go of the war, this war within yourself of, I shouldn't do the addictive behavior, I'm bad for doing the addictive behavior, if only I didn't do the addictive behavior. I'm going to try harder not to do the addictive behavior. Doesn't work. I mean, we tried that. And usually, if we take that approach, we'll either be completely unsuccessful or, in some cases, we'll be successful in stopping one addictive behavior, but usually then it just gets transferred to something else, right? Then you just start doing something else compulsively. The fly is here today because it's warm out again. And so that seems to me like an important thing, is to have compassion. It's like the first step, just to see that you do this thing because you want to avoid something worse. Have compassion for that. See that it's actually a smart move. And then, give yourself permission to do the smart thing. But also give yourself permission to see that maybe the smart thing, maybe there's more information available now that would inform what the smart thing is, right? Because the smart thing for a 5-year-old versus the smart thing for a 45-year-old may be different contexts, different resources. So, just to have compassion and then be open to the possibility that maybe there's some greater resource, greater information, greater support available now. So that's how I would approach it. And there are specific things that I might do. If somebody asked my advice to work one-on-one with them to sort of explore the nature of that experience of the addiction, and to see if it might be possible to discover a more positive, more life-affirming way to meet the experience that's happening, then I might suggest some specific ways to explore that. For example, almost always, I would say, I find that it's useful to experience, to really have a more, let's say, a more expansive focus that includes the bodily sensations. Because often under stress, we develop a very narrow focus. There's a biological reason for that. But some of us get stuck in that for a long time. It's a very narrow focus. And we have a hard time seeing or experiencing or feeling anything that is beyond that. So it's very useful to expand that focus to include the sensations in the body, the whole body. Because oftentimes we're just not aware of, like, what's going on in my feet? How do my feet feel? And a lot of so-called spirituality is very body negative. I get a lot of emails from people who want to get out of their body, get rid of their body, be done with the body, see through the body. And there's a time and a place to explore the body in a way that allows for, the transparency of some of that, the belief about I am this thing, right? Because anytime we imagine ourselves to be a thing, it's limited by definition. And it's not wrong to be limited, But the trouble is just that tends to lead to anxiety. If I'm this thing, this limited thing, and there's something else out there, and that something else out there is probably threatening, probably hostile, probably going to destroy me. So I have to protect myself, fortify my boundaries. So it's very useful in certain contexts to explore that and to discover the transparency of that. But that doesn't mean that we need to get rid of that. I don't think that that's useful. It certainly has not been useful in my experience. I mean, I tried to get rid of my body for a long time, very unsuccessfully, very painfully. And it's such a relief to welcome the body, to have no problem with the body. The body is fine. Sure, it's a concept. It's a concept that we use to describe an actual experience, though. So the concept isn't what's important. It's the welcoming of the experience, and that can have a lot of therapeutic value. I mean, that's a fairly well-researched field of study. Under stress, the activity in the right hemisphere of the brain diminishes, and right hemisphere activity corresponds to bodily awareness, the experience, the felt sense of the sensations in the body, the whole body. Because the other problem that can happen is we can get a very narrow fixation on a particular sensation. I know I've had this experience where that particular sensation seems unbearable, so we try to do anything to get rid of it. But the more we try to do to get rid of it, the worse it seems to become. But again, the expansive focus that includes the whole body, all of the sensations, tends to shift the perspective so that those sensations are no longer experienced out of context. Instead they're experienced in the context of the whole. There's only one whole sensation happening. And so when that part of the sensation is put into the context, it tends to change the experience. So anyway, that would be something that I would probably encourage a person to do. And the other things are probably a little bit too involved to discuss in this video, but hopefully that was useful. So the next one is a long one. I would like to ask about looking into the terror. I recently had a terrifying experience and tried my best to open to it. So I'll just pause there and say, first of all, that, you know, it goes against everything that is natural, in a sense, to be open to terror, because terror is this signal that says danger, right? Like, you're going to be destroyed, you're going to die. Run away. Or prepare yourself to fight. So to be open under those circumstances, to be, you know, to have that kind of expansive focus, that's going to be a challenge. Right? So I think it's useful, again, to have compassion for yourself, to see that this is really hard, because it's every cell in your body saying, get out of here, close off, harden up, run away, defend, protect. But an interesting thing about the wording is, you know, to try my best to open to it. So the way that this is being perceived is that there's me here, separate, and then there's that, which is the threat that is causing this terror. So, you know, you can explore that and just, you know, for a moment, just forget about trying to open to it. Just explore what is the nature of the experience actually that's happening, because it's being interpreted as separate self here, threat over there. So separate self must defend against threat over there. But notice, where is the terror occurring? What is the nature of the terror? How do you know that there is terror? Where is it felt? Where is it experienced? Does it have boundaries? Does it have a source? Can you identify the source of the terror? Is there an object to which the terror seems to be attached, emanating from? What is that object? Can you find it? Can you find the separation between you and that object? So, you know, just exploring the nature of the experience that's happening before jumping ahead to how do I open to it might be a useful thing to do. Because what if you don't need to open anything? Then, you know, it would be silly and not particularly useful to try and open to something that you don't need to open to. You know, what if you can't open to it? What if there's nothing to open to? What if there's no one to open to it? You know, or what if there's already exists no separation between this and that? So there's no possibility of opening. So it's useful to explore. So it said, it felt horrifying, and I just stayed with and found it exciting, but I intuited that this terror had to be looked into all the way to see it all the way through. Like a milestone. Right, so that does tend to be our orientation. We usually think that there's some progress to be made, like I have to get through this, because when I get through this, then there'll be something better, there'll be safety. And that's a strong conditioning. I don't know, it's maybe even hardwired into us. Just have to get through this. If I can, like, this is my opportunity, and the terror is here, and if I can see through it all the way, then something better will happen. Then I'll be free. But that's worth taking a look at. You know, how do you know that's true? What if there's nothing to be had? What if you don't need to gain anything? Or even if you could gain something, let's say that that's a possibility. I mean, why not? Maybe, because we have experience of that, right? Like you can go to the store and get something. So you actually have experience of going, doing something and obtaining something. I mean, that's sort of a cheap example, but you know, you could be like, you know, the adventurer who goes to, you know, the heart of the jungle and finds you have some great mystical experience and you come back with this wisdom. I mean, that's a possibility. So let's not dismiss that. But the nature of that, even if there is something that can be obtained, can be had, can be found, gained, you don't know what it is. And if it's actually valuable, it's something new, something you couldn't possibly know what it is. You can't anticipate it. It's outside of your existing model. You don't presently see it. You don't presently know it. So, in order to have the experience in which that will be gained or learned, you have to not know. Anyway, you know, in life, I don't know if you've noticed this, but there's a lot of really unpleasant stuff that happens, and if you knew ahead of time, like, next week I'm gonna have to get cancer. Holy shit, no. I don't want that. No, thank you. Right? So, the nature of the experience is such that if we can't know what it is or what it's about or what we're going to have to do or what it all means. We can't know that, because if we did, A, it would ruin the fun, and B, it would paralyze us. We wouldn't do it. We wouldn't be able to do it. We'd just become like stones. So, yeah, so don't try to see all the way through it. Try just, and don't even try, just be present with this as it is happening now. That's it. Be present with yourself. Be yourself now. Without, and I know this is kind of a tall order, but you know, I'll say it anyway, without the expectation of what the outcome will be. Anyway, you know, if you have the expectation of what the outcome will be, you're limiting it. So why do that? It says, I've heard it called the void or complete annihilation. Can you comment on the void? I feel it waiting on me to directly look at it. I went to conjure it, but something obscures it. I sense at times that there's really nothing here but what is verbing or what is happening. I realized the other night a huge aloneness, and there was no one here but sitting and seeing. It felt spooky and hollow, and yet I was awed. Yeah, right. So there is this sense, you know, there's a possibility of having this experience of feels like emptiness or nothingness, and that can be perceived as, I don't want that, right? That's like really scary and lonely, and who wants to be lonely? I've talked about this before, you know, I used to have that experience with some frequency, you know, it'd be like, wow, no, this is too much, too unbearable, too scary, too lonely. So that's the one way of seeing it. But that's a way of seeing it that's still through the lens of the current model, current understanding, current limitations. Because if you are convinced that there are things, that everything, that life is made up of, it's dual, you know, has a dualistic nature with many separate, distinct things that actually have thingness. Like there's some something that makes that a distinct thing, then to discover, to have this insight that there's nothing there that actually makes it a thing. The thing itself doesn't exist, there's just the appearance. Then that seems lonely and scary and hollow and empty and nothingness and all of that. But if you let go of that whole model, that whole way of understanding, that whole perception, which, you know, again, that's a tall order, I understand that. But you could play with that, you know, just to let go of that for a moment. Then it's possible to see it completely differently, completely new. Not, and I say completely, I don't mean that anything appears to change, but just that what was perceived as emptiness or hollowness takes on it gets perceived as fullness, as you know, love. That's the thing, you know. It's like, if I don't know what else to say about it other than that. But yeah, it seems scary sometimes. Next one. You mention in many of your books, including the one I'm reading now, just remain with what is prior to all thoughts, concepts, and distinctions. Then no more speaking is necessary. The question is, I understand this concept now and how within this state there is no separate self. Maybe this is what Nisargadatta meant when he spoke of staying with the I am. But anyway, the problem is, thoughts always come up, sensations, emotions always come up. And during the day, when you are working or doing chores, you need to think, so you can't stay in that state. Do you have any advice on how to get into this state as often as possible? Yeah, right. So the wording of that quote, just remain with what is prior to all thoughts, concepts, and distinctions. Not the greatest wording. On a couple of accounts. First, because it sort of implies that there's a possibility of not, and secondly, because it implies a separation that doesn't really exist. So I think the way that I would phrase it differently would be that just see if it's possible, just inquire, explore, play, investigate. Play, it's important, you know, you got to make it playful. So see if it's possible to find anything other than just what's happening. To see if there's any way that you can actually find any separation at all in your actual experience. Not conceptually, but in actual experience. And if that's done, you know, if there's actually this inquiry, this investigation, then it's possible to see that this is it. So when that's seen, then the idea that there's some state that needs to be maintained or entered might fall away, because you know you can apply the same investigation to that. You know, like if the idea is, how do I enter a state then you can investigate, well, what is a state? Who does the state apply to? Where does that exist? Who is it that would enter and exit the state? How is that entering and exiting done? Am I actually sure that there's such a thing? Am I actually sure that there's such a thing as the state, or such a thing as the one who would enter or exit it? Or even such a thing as the space in which such a thing might exist, either the individual or the state. I know it's tricky because at least I used to come from this notion that there was something better other than what's happening, and I need to find, it's hidden, and I need to find it, achieve it, maintain it, enter that state forever. And just turns out that that's not it. That's the recipe for suffering. So the recipe for peace. I talk about the recipe for suffering a lot, but what about the recipe for peace? The recipe for peace is to accept this as it is right now, and to inquire into, to investigate, to play in it. Not in, but, language falls apart at some points. Just to discover sounds like that fire's going. I gotta go. So, right, where was I? Right, the recipe for peace. The recipe for peace just right now. This is the recipe for peace. This is it. If you just simply explore this right now, again, in a playful way, don't make it work. Don't make it something, that you're supposed to do or that you have to do to get something else. Then you will overlook the actual gift, which is just this. It's the actuality of this moment right now. Even including the compulsion to figure it out, to get somewhere, to understand, to achieve. See, isn't that so much nicer? The objections still come sometimes. Yeah, but what's he talking about? This can't be it. There's got to be something else. Yeah, this is okay. I can't find the problem now, but there must be one. I've got to get it now. I've got to understand it now. I've got to figure it out now. This is my last chance. I've given myself a deadline. Got to get it. I've got to understand it. I can't go on suffering. I can't go on with this angst. I have to know who I am. See, the joke is you don't have to know who you are. Because you already are. What would knowing give you? If I knew, then I could finally be. Then I could finally be at peace. Do you get the joke? And still that goes on. That's the nature of creation. That's what's always happening. It's the Ouroboros, the snake, the serpent eating its tail. And that's okay. Who said it needed to stop? Including all of the conditioning, all that unpleasant stuff, you know, you can address that, work on that, or not. You don't have to reach some perfected state. Because what would that even be? What would that mean? Then you would what? Never make mistakes? Never experience pain? Never experience anything? I mean, think about it. It's all relative. It's natural for us to want to avoid pain. But it's impossible for us to actually avoid pain. We can reduce it, maybe, by being wise, being, cautious, intelligent, prepared. But we can't eliminate it. People have tried, but when you try to cut off the pain, you cut off the pleasure, you cut off the adventure, the play, the willingness to experiment, to explore. So that's my response to that one. Okay, next one. I wonder if you hear this often, but here it comes again. Don't you think that some of what you're saying is nihilistic? I have so many times removed your book from my Kindle, only to put it back. Some of what you say rings so true. Could you address this to your readers? And so I looked up the definition of nihilism, according to Merriam-Webster online. Says, 1A is a viewpoint that traditional values and beliefs are unfounded and that existence is senseless and useless. So, no. Right? I don't say that just because senseless and useless kind of carries a negative connotation. Maybe in the pure sense I might agree that senseless and useless, but only because there'd have to be some reference point, some sort of absolute to understand what is sense and what is value. But I don't really suggest that existence is senseless and useless in the usual way that we think of that. Why? It's wonderful. Perfect. It is beautiful. And horrible. I mean, there's horrible stuff that happens. I mean, people are just mean. Just mean. And that's really sad. You know, and sometimes, we end up feeling sad and depressed, and it happens. But no, it's not senseless and useless. So I'm not, certainly not preaching nihilism according to that definition. 1B, a doctrine that denies any objective ground or truth, and especially of moral truths. Yeah, I'd agree with that. Except for the doctrine part. Not really into doctrines, but sure, I don't really think that there's an objective ground of truth, and especially of moral truths. I don't think that it's possible. I won't deny that anything is possible, but I have not yet found it. Have you? And I'm not talking about Jesus is God, read the Bible. I'm talking about, have you actually found the objective foundation for truth so that you can know beyond all doubt what truth is absolutely? So, yeah. So I guess I'm a nihilist. 2A is a doctrine or belief that conditions in the social organization are so bad as to make destruction desirable for its own sake, independent of any constructive program or possibility. No. So I'm 1/3 a nihilist. No, I mean, so what is it that I really, what is it, in this moment, if I had a message, what would my message be? My message would be, well, it sounds awfully cliche, but I guess my message would be love. Not in the way that we are taught to think of it. Not like you have to be nice all the time. Or that you have to like everything. Love in the broader sense. Love in the sense of accepting whatever happens. Not condoning it, not saying that I want more of this necessarily, but just to accept it right now, just to say this right now, I will not reject. I will welcome it. Because only when it's welcomed, only when it's really received, only when it's really loved, then there's the possibility of, well, anything, But when it's rejected, then there's only one possibility, which is rejection. All of the effort goes into rejection. And there's that cliche, what you resist. Oh, it's God again. I wish he would stop calling while I'm doing these videos. He's pissed off because he lost a card game last night. Anyway, he'll have to leave a message. Wow. Persistent, that guy. So, yeah, right. So what you resist persists. And there's truth to that cliche. Because I think of it like this, I like to think of things as children. Because I feel like it's easier that way. Just imagine a child who's been locked out in the cold. A young child who's been locked out in the cold. And you expect that child to be happy? To knock on the door politely and say, "Would you please let me in? I'll be very nice to you." Please. Children don't do that. They haven't been trained yet. They haven't been trained into being, into the right way to manipulate. They only know the rawness of the actual experience, which is, let me in. I'm so angry, I'm so upset, I'm so scared. What's wrong with you? Why won't you let me in? It's only later that they learn what's wrong with me. Why won't you let me in? Just let me in, let me in. And then you let them in, maybe. And you have the expectation, well, now that I've let the child in, he or she will be happy. Doesn't work that way. They're still upset. Haven't you ever noticed that? And we say, stop it now. But there's a momentum to these things. It needs to play out. It's important. It's only after that has been played out, then there's and played out and received, right? Then then there's a reconnection. So when there are experiences that we reject, when there is something that happens and we reject it and say, this shouldn't be, anything, then we're essentially keeping the child locked out, not even letting them in. Of course they're going to grow more, louder, angrier, more scared. And then when we let them in, then we have this expectation, well, if I just look, then it's going to be okay. Why? If I just accept it for 1 second, it will be okay. All that rage maybe has to be met. Maybe all that fear has to be allowed, received, reintegrated. But if we see it, like that, the reason I like that metaphor is because who would want to keep the child locked out in the cold? Even if a child is angry as hell and comes back in and starts smashing stuff, you're really going to keep the child locked out in the cold? So that's the way I feel about experience. All experience is like children being locked out in the cold. Just need to come back in, come back home. Be received, be welcomed for who they are on their terms. Because, every experience contributes to the richness of life, and if we shut some of them out, because we say, well, that's too painful, that's too unpleasant, too big, too much, too scary, too this, too that. It just doesn't work. That's the problem. So much nicer to welcome all experience. And that's what I would describe as love. Because it's finally welcoming and accepting everything for what it is, for who it is, which is yourself, ultimately. What else could it be? Really, just take a look. Right now, what else could it be? Okay, next one. I have an addiction to watching pornography that comes and goes. No pun intended. Haha. I feel conflicted about this behavior because on one hand I feel it is inappropriate, but then I have these non-dual thoughts that say this is what's happening, it's meaningless, there's no one doing it, etc. There seems to be a mind war going on that's causing misery. Yeah, right. It's that conflict, because there's this, like I talked about earlier, there's compulsion to do something, because if you don't, then there's something that is perceived to be worse, right? So just explore that. If I didn't watch pornography, then what? In that moment. I know it's easy to say, well, then it'd be wonderful, my life would be better in all these ways, because that's the mind war, right? Is this idea, there's this idea that it would be better if I didn't watch pornography, but what does the body feel? You imagine what it would be like in that moment when there's this compulsion, watch the porn. And, the internet's broken. No porn. Can't do it. So what is it that watching porn protects against? It's something worse. It's this feeling, this experience that you don't want, because it feels like it would be too scary, too much, too big, too bad, too painful, too hurtful, too destructive, something. So I'm not an advocate for war. Who wants war? Not me. I like peace. And so the first step of ending the war is, to have, I think, some compassion and understanding for the other side, so to speak, right? So there's the side that you're at war with, which is the compulsion to watch porn. to have compassion and understand why this is necessary from the perspective of this side, this part that wants to watch pornography. Because why? Because if it didn't, it would be scared or in pain. So I think that's the first step. Last week when I was in the middle of this addiction cycle, I forgot about looking for any physical tension and I was distracted by this mind war. Do you have any advice about this addiction? So yeah, so then the other part is throughout the day, not just when the compulsion is there, because when the compulsion is there, it's not usually the best time to try and do something that you're not very practiced at. So developing that expanded awareness or focus that includes the sensations in the body regularly, that tends to be helpful. If you just wait until, oh my God, got this compulsion, I need to watch porn, what do I do? Maybe I should try to check for tension in the body, but it's too much at that point. Or you won't even think about it because it's just not a habit. So that's my advice. One, have compassion. Welcome this part. Stop rejecting the part. The more you reject the part that wants to watch porn, the more you make it wrong and bad. The more that you try and get rid of it, suppress it, so forth, the more that this war will continue, or it will shift to something else. Because this part has some valuable, important information, or let's say it's in charge of something important for you. So if you try to get rid of it, you're not likely to be successful. And if you were successful, you would regret that. So instead of trying to get rid of it, or argue with it, or make it say it's bad, because you've had that experience in your life, right? Whatever it is you do to this part, however you judge this part, you've experienced that judgment, and you know how unpleasant it is, and you know how you've reacted when you've received that kind of judgment. So why do you expect this part to be different? So have compassion, have respect, allow this part some dignity. It's not bad. It's just that the conditioned behavior that it knows in order to try and achieve whatever it is that it most deeply wants to achieve, which isn't watching porn, by the way, it's something else. You take a look, see what's underneath it. Something, it'll be something like connection, love, okayness, oneness. It'll be something like that. So this part, which is in charge of something really important like that, only knows how to express that or get that at this point through watching porn. And if you go to battle with it, it's going to say, well, you must be crazy because oneness or love or whatever it is that is really important here is really important, and this is the only way that I know how to express that. So, you're crazy to try to cut this off. So have compassion and see what it is, the deeper purpose, the positive purpose of it is. Then you don't have to go to war. Then you can get creative, right? It's like, okay, so there's this deeper purpose, this positive purpose, this positive intention. How can I creatively support that? What would it be like if I already had that? Then how would that transform this experience of the compulsion to watch porn? creative ways, evoking that creativity, connecting with the creativity. That would be probably helpful. Much better than going to war. Okay, next one. Many non-duality teachers say stuff like, we are not our feelings, we are not our sensations, we are unlimited being, and etc. But when something happens to you, me, or anyone, at the moment it happens, there is no separation. If I feel fear, the moment it happens, it is happening to me, and it feels like it's me. In this moment, it is me. Only a moment later I can look back at it and examine it. But, like you say, trying to get rid of a feeling sensation only makes it stick. So on the one hand, thoughts and feelings and sensations come and go, so they are not us. On the other hand, the moment they appear, you automatically identify with them because there is no separation between you and the feeling sensation the moment it happens. So, do you think the enlightened masters got to a point where they see that they are not their feeling sensations at the very exact moment they appear? Okay, there's more, but I'll address that part. So, who is it that would not be their feelings? That's the question. And this is, I agree that there's a lot of what I consider to be very misleading information and suggestions in this field of non-duality. People suggesting you are not this and you are not that. But then, which is perhaps in a sense true, but what remains then is the sense that I must be something. So if I am not my feelings, then I am what? I am the one who's aware of the feelings? That's usually what it comes to. But just see if that's true. I mean, in actual experience, what can we say? In actual experience, at least my experience is, feelings happen. The attachment of my feelings, these are my feelings, my experiences, that's somewhat diluted, okay? But I can say that there are feelings, sensations, experiences happening. And that's it. That's all I can say. I can't say that there's something that has or experiences these things. So why then is it necessary to create a distance between the experience and the imagined experiencer? Why do I have to say these are not my feelings? What's the need of that? These are not my feelings. Why not? It's just to take a look and see who is the one to whom they apply my. Who is the one that my references? It's fictional. There is no one to whom all of this is happening. You cannot experience that. Or if you can, let me know. I've never had an experience of me, of mine, of self, separation. I've never had that experience. Space, for example, that's another awareness, consciousness. These are what you would call reifications, right? Because we say, because there is an experience, there must be an experiencer. It's a reification. There is no experiencer. There is no I. There is no self. There is no separation. There's no one for my feelings to attach to. There's just feelings. Okay. It says, in your book, you say, remain with direct experience. Try and find something other than this. And when you cannot, then you see what is as it is. Then you cease to believe in anything else. Don't look for a nothing called self. Don't look for nothing called I am. Just remain with direct experience. Stay here. So the question is, what about all those teachers who say, look for the witness, the one who is aware, and etc.? I don't know. I mean, my take on that is that it's a last refuge. The witness is a last refuge for within that model of I'm a separate self in a hostile world. So there is a certain wisdom that can arise, which is, holy shit, I can't actually protect myself. And that leads to either to severe anxiety or, in some cases, there's a strategy of retreating into the witness, which is imagined to be separate from everything. I am the witness. What is happening is what is witnessed. I am separate from what is witnessed. Which is fine. I mean, it's not, there's no moral value attached to that. I mean, it's fine if that's what you enjoy. But it's, to me, there's a certain, it's kind of dead. And there's an awful, there's a great deal of effort and exertion necessary to maintain that identity. Because it's an identity as a thing. I am the witness. Not wrong, just not very pleasant to me. So, I don't really advocate for that because I think that it's, I mean, my experience is it's much easier to let go of all the effort. To let go of the need to defend oneself and to really finally meet and welcome everything that happens without this unpleasant, to what I would experience as an unpleasant need to distance myself from it. To define myself as an entity that is separate from what is happening. And an entity, by the way, that can't actually be found. Can't actually be experienced. No proof whatsoever that it actually exists. So, you know, preferences, I guess. Just not mine. Okay, there's a couple more. It says, so what about all those non-duality sayings that you are not your feelings, that you are eternal, that the real you will never die, and etc. I will never be able to find the real me if I think I'm not separate from experience, or if I think that I'm the experience. Right, yeah. You'll never be able to find the real you anyway. I mean, I say never, but I shouldn't say that. Because who knows? I mean, I'm open-minded. Anything's possible. And it's not going to be a true statement if I say never. But, I mean, it might be. I guess it's a possibility, but I think it would be more truthful for me to say, I have never been able to find the real self, so-called real me. Capital R, capital M. Never been able to find it. I don't believe that it exists. I haven't ever found any evidence of it. And like I've written about, you know, you can certainly say, well, just because you haven't found it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, so maybe you should just keep on searching. And that's fine. But the way I look at it is, I've never found Santa Claus. I'm not convinced that it would be useful for me to keep searching for Santa Claus. I don't think there is a Santa Claus. I have never found the real me as a thing, as an entity, as a separate self, as the experiencer, as the witness. Never found it. I don't think that it would be useful to continue to search for it. I don't think that it exists. And, in any case, I find that that search for defining the real me, to find who I really am, is a search of restriction and narrowing. It's a search of exclusion, right? Because if I can't find you can't find who you are. I don't think. So what you have to do then is use deduction, right? So you remove everything that you are not. You identify, I am not this, I am not that, I am not this, I am not that, I am not this, I am not that. And you do that for long enough, and the experience becomes narrow, restricted, cramped. And because the model is still I am a separate self existing in a hostile world, then in that narrowing there's less buffer, less safety, less room for error. So it becomes increasingly important and urgent that everything, that you are always perfect. Perfect in your vigilance. And that I find very unpleasant. And because there sure are a lot of things to go through to eliminate as possibilities for the self, seemingly infinitely many things, maybe they're finite, I don't know, but there's a lot, a whole lot, then it seems like that search would be fairly endless to eliminate every possibility of what I might be. But after enough of that, my experience at least has been, all right, I've satisfied my curiosity. I'm not any of it. None of it defines me. None of it is who I am. And yet I am all. I'm all of it. And in seeing that, it's like a light goes on, because it's like, wow, I've always known that. That's always been my experience. It's always been the case. And then, even though nothing changes, everything changes. It's all transformed, because rather than it being this restrictive, cramped, narrow, anxiety-ridden experience, all about self-defense, it becomes expansive, boundless, inclusive, welcoming. And the anxiety transforms. And I want to be clear, it's not always pleasant. I've got a long history of anxiety, intense anxiety, and that continues. But the interesting thing is that sometimes what was described as anxiety now is like sort of blissful. But not always. Sometimes it's unpleasant. But it doesn't matter. It's okay. Says, you read Nisargadatta's book, I Am That. When he said, stay with the I Am, surely he was pointing to something, wasn't he? I don't know. The trouble with a lot of these things is, particularly with someone like Nisargadatta, unless you're going back to the original recordings of what he spoke, and you happen to speak his language, then you're relying on translations of transcriptions. So there's a lot of room for error. Plus, even if somebody's communicating in the language that you understand, there's still room for error because we don't ever know what somebody really means. And anyway, who cares? Who cares what somebody really means? Because since we won't ever understand that, you know, our culture is very fixated on understanding in a particular way, intellectual understanding, thinking wrongly that that's actually possible. We can get close, and I'm not saying it's not a worthwhile endeavor in some respects, but it has limitations. Just like in, you know, mathematics, you can have a asymptote, right? It's an approximation, or you can have a I mean, there's a lot of examples in math like that. There's approximations. I mean, all math is an approximation in a sense. So it can be useful. We can use math to, you know, predict a lot of movements in very, very quite accurately enough to, for example, send a spacecraft out beyond the solar system. It's impressive, but it's still an approximation. So if we have a false sense of security if we think that we can actually understand intellectually what somebody else means. But not only that, but it's extremely limited and narrow because there's so much more that's being communicated. It's not just the words, it's not just the ideas, there's an experience. There's a perspective. And if we get hung up on the words, we might miss something that's, in a sense, more important. Because as many people have said, I mean, it's a bit of a cliche at this point, right? You know, I understand intellectually, but I understand intellectually, but. So they're describing the limitation of understanding intellectually. You understand intellectually, but it's not satisfying because you're missing out on what's being pointed to, or not even that there's something that's being pointed to. More importantly, it's just to look. Just the perspective, not even to see the thing itself. It's just that if you've been looking in the wrong way, if your focus has been very narrow and very exclusive, then really the value is to look differently, to shift your perspective, to broaden your perspective, to expand it, to expand the focus, to soften, instead of endlessly chasing your tail, so to speak. Finally, to rest and to see the whole big picture, so to speak. Then you realize, oh, it's not. It doesn't even have to be. It's not that understanding. It's not about an intellectual understanding. It's just about the big picture, the feeling, the experience, the perspective, the seeing, the release, the softening, the discovery that you are not the compulsion See, you're not. So we can talk about this in many different ways, and they can seem to be contradictory. You know, in this one video, I've probably said 20 obviously contradictory things. But if you get hung up on the words and trying to understand the intellectual meaning, if you think that there's an object, you know, it's like, in some philosophy, they believe that there are, I think it was Plato, right, that said that there are that ideas, thoughts, concepts actually have correlates in like an objective reality. There's actually an object for that exists in reality. It's not in this three-dimensional experience necessarily, but somewhere floating off in the ether there are objects that are correlates to those ideas. And so we tend to get, I think he was completely wrong on many things. But we tend to get hung up on that. I think we're very influenced by that way of thinking. Thinking that if I can just understand this intellectually, then I will be able to grasp it, right? That's what we say. We say, I want to grasp it. Like there's actually an object that we can possess, that we can hold, that we can obtain and hold on to, that has some kind of value. Like possessing that thing will somehow give you what you want. And yet what you want, if you tell the truth, is not to possess a thing. It's to let go. To let go. And that's really what the invitation is always, you know, is to let go, to let go, let go. If you let go right now, really, just let go. You don't need to understand it, you don't need to get it, you don't need to get anywhere. You don't need to be better, you don't need anything. Just let go for 1 second. Then what? What's needed? And there you have it. Another episode concluded. Thank you for spending this time with me. And if you have questions for the next episode, then send them to me. My email address is joeylott@gmail.com. And I'll see you next time. Take care.